house. This is a late week 2 video from our read along of The One Thing by Gary Keller. I am late. This should surprise no one. It always happens at least once during One Book July. July is supposed to be the calmest month for us here in this house, and that never happens. Frankly, it just never happens. So I thought about splitting this video into 2 parts. So I haven't decided yet. I'm just gonna start, and if I feel like it's really dragging on a whole lot, then I'm gonna go ahead and cut it, and then I will upload a part 2 separately, okay? So I'm telling you that now because I want to record this as few times as possible because it's already late. And so I'm hoping that this will be just in one, but if it gets to be really, really long, I feel like it might be a lot of information all at once, okay? So we'll see how it goes, and I will annotate the screen right down in here. If I decide to go ahead and do a part 2, you'll see that popping up down in here right about now saying, yeah, okay, there is a part 2 after all, okay? So part 2 of The One Thing is called The Lies, and it is a big, it's like 4 or 5 chapters, okay? So he talks about the lies that we buy into because they feel true, okay? These are all things that I know for me at least felt these were like truths. These were kind of universal truths, right? And he says that these lies can get between you and succeeding in the things you want to succeed in. So he says the 6 lies are: everything matters equally, multitasking, a disciplined life, willpower is always on will call, a balanced life, and big is bad. So chapter 4 was the everything matters equally idea. And he says, as far as tasks and productivity are concerned, equality is a lie. Because when everything and when every single thing feels equally urgent and equally important, they all seem equal, so they all need your attention, so you can never really get them all fully done or give them your full attention because everything else apparently deserves the same attention, right? Pardon me. So he says instead of having a to-do list, which we all love our to-do list, don't we? That's why we're here, is to have a success list instead. So he says if you can narrow down, keep narrowing down and narrowing down, look at your to-do list and go, okay, what on this list matters absolute most? So then you have this whole huge to-do list. You end up with a fraction of it that is what you think what matters most. Then look only at that fraction of it. Okay, out of all of this, what really matters most? And if you can narrow it down even more, so you have a fraction of the fraction, and he says go extreme with it. Keep going, get it narrowed down to one thing. And it's kind of the idea of doing the next right thing, right? So when I look at my to-do list, I do try to do that. I do try to prioritize things every day. And a couple of us in the One Thing read along group in the band app have discussed this a little bit. That this idea of, gosh, when you're a parent, you know, so many of the things you have to do aren't like your things, right? I know I have, hey, this video is late for a reason. Like everybody else's stuff was more important at the time and it just didn't happen. So it's the idea of, it's called the Pareto principle, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. The majority of your progress will come from the minority of your actions. So the idea is to narrow things down enough to the point that you can make a small number of actions, like actionable things on your plate, yield the biggest results. Okay, so the summary for chapter 4, he says, number 1, go small. So focus on being productive, and what matters most should drive your day. Number 2 is go extreme. So take what matters and keep slicing it down by asking what matters most until you're down to one thing and do that thing first. Number 3, this is one I know a lot of us struggle with, is saying no, even if it's just to yourself. Okay, so when you're paring down those to-do lists, those task lists, okay, no, I'm not going to do that now, I'm going to do it later. I'm not going to do it now. Say those things to anything else until that one thing is done. Kind of give yourself permission to say no to doing anything else until the one particular thing is done. And he says, don't get trapped in the checkoff game, because you guys, if your lists are anything like mine, they can just go on forever. I am okay with that because I do have, like, my lists are kind of split up in ways that are very much DTD method related. So, you know, it's like a someday maybe list. Okay, I need to revisit it once a month, but I don't feel the urge to get everything on that list done because I know the purpose of the list. And that's what this chapter was really good for me, was I need to make sure when I'm making lists for the month, lists for the week, and lists for the day, that I don't treat everything as equal, because things do happen. And not treating everything as equal allows us some more flexibility and a little bit less guilt when your videos are late. I do still feel guilty though. Chapter 5 is about multitasking. I'm sure we all have our own opinions about multitasking. He says multitasking is a lie. It's neither efficient nor effective. And he talked about back in the intro about time and energy, treating your time and your energy as if they're tangible things. If I am to be effective, is taking my time and my energy and spreading them very thinly, is that effective? Am I really going to get anything done or be able to give anything the attention it truly deserves if I have my time and my energy all spread out real thin rather than laser focused on one thing? So multitasking, what it makes us do to ourselves is we end up we double and triple up on the things we feel we should do because we hope we can get everything done. And that's a big problem with the idea of multitasking, is it sells you this lie that you can get through everything. And then if you guys are anything like me, well then when you don't get through everything, well, what's wrong with me? Am I lazy? Am I ineffective? Am I mentally drained? What am I doing wrong that I'm not getting all these things wrong? Well, it's not necessarily any of those things. It could very well be the fact that I've kind of sold myself this lie that I should be getting all of that done because I have it constant in my head because I'm trying to multitask. Pardon me. He says we have time to do the things we need to do. We just feel we need to do too many things in the time we have. Okay, so that's kind of the same basic idea, is you beat yourself up because you feel like I have enough time to get all this stuff done. What is wrong with me that I'm not getting this stuff done? Let's see. Multitasking is also that juggling idea, and oh man, again, parents, right? It's called task switching. So you're kind of still doing one task at a time, but you're redirecting your attention with each switch. So if I'm working on A and then somebody comes in the room and needs help with B, and then, let's say, okay, so I'm working and then the boys are doing something and then the boys come in and they have a question. So then I have to take my attention off of this, kind of switch gears in my brain, answer their question. And then if they're like, okay, we're good, and then they go out, then I have to switch gears again to go back to this. And studies have shown that constant task switching, each time you do it, your mental focus and aptitude kind of decreases because that task switching is very mentally taxing. In the book, he equates trying to multitask. You don't have enough bandwidth in your brain to maintain time and effectiveness. When you are doing too many things at once, you're not giving anything your full attention. Plus, if you're doing that task switching thing, mentally you're just going downhill anyway. The more time you spend switched to the other tasks, so task A and task B, if I switch from task A to task B, the more time I spend over here on task B, there's the less likelihood that I'm even going to get back to task A. And oh boy, did I feel that one. If my work gets interrupted because the boys need something, I'll eventually get drawn into that. And I'm pretty good usually about, hey guys, I need another 20 minutes. Or I'll set a time ahead of time. Hey, I'm going to work for half an hour. Everybody's good, right? Okay. They're all old enough that I can do that. But if they need something and I do get drawn out of work, it's very unlikely I'm going to get back to it. So that gets very frustrating. That redirecting makes you lose time because every time you have to redirect your attention, it takes more time to do it with each redirection. Chronic multitasking gives you the distorted sense of how long should actually take. That was another big one for me. So if I constantly feel like I'm putting my attention in several different directions, if I constantly feel like I'm multitasking, and listen, I understand as parents, for those of you who are out there who are parents, like that's kind of a state of being, right? Your attention is constantly being pulled in several directions. It starts to give you this distorted idea of, well, I have all these things to do, and like we talked about earlier, I have all these things to do and I should have enough time to do them all, because that's true. We should have time to do them all, but the way we're doing them doesn't allow us time to do them all. And so then I get this distorted sense in my head of how long things actually should take, and that leads me to procrastinate. That leads me to go, oh, well, that's going to take 10 times longer than I think it should, because maybe the last time I had to do that task, well, heck, maybe the last time I had to do it, I got interrupted 3 times, so it took me an hour. And I know darn well, logically, that that's a task that shouldn't take me more than 10 or 15 minutes. But because I got interrupted so many times, or because I was doing too many other things at the same time, because I was multitasking, I end up feeling like it's a task that's going to take an hour. Well, I don't have an hour to do that task right now. I only have 15 minutes, so I procrastinate. That really, really struck home for me. When we multitask, we also make more mistakes and we have more stress, plain and simple. So his summary for the multitasking being a lie chapter is, number one, distraction is natural. Okay, if you're in a work environment, there are other people around, other things going on. We as humans are distractible creatures, okay? If you're home and you kind of have to have your attention kind of, on other things plus on what you're doing, distraction is natural. So don't beat yourself up for getting distracted. Everybody gets distracted. Multitasking takes a toll. It really does. We only have so much bandwidth up here, right? So multitasking really does take a toll, and when you're doing that task switching, things take even longer than they should. Distraction undermines your results because of the same reasons as in number two. It's this constant switching. It's a lack of bandwidth over time. It's a lack of attention over time. So, and plus it's this idea of all of that for me feeds procrastination. I would like to know if it feels the same way to you guys, that one. I know that trying to multitask too much ends up making me a worse procrastinator because I have a distorted idea of how long things really should take. Chapter 6 is a disciplined life. He says we actually don't need more discipline. We need to better direct and manage the discipline we already have. And how we would direct the discipline that we already have is into developing habits. He says success is not a marathon of disciplined action. It's a sprint fueled by discipline just long enough for habit to take over. And this whole chapter really spoke to me as well. I love the idea of not having to be disciplined constantly to succeed. Because he says in the book, even reading that is exhausting to him. So the idea of disciplined people, it's not that they're hardcore disciplined people, it's that they've trained a handful of habits into their lives. That yes, developing those habits took discipline, but once they got the habit developed, they didn't need that discipline anymore to maintain that because the habit part of it takes over, okay? And then it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling cycle, right? So he says success is actually choosing the right habit, hopefully your one thing, right, that we narrowed down from all our lists. Use just enough discipline to cement that one right habit. Do that one right thing, and doing it keeps you from having to do all of the things, right? If you can develop this habit, it should actually prevent you from multitasking, right? It should actually prevent you from treating everything like it matters equally. So that's what I mean by a self-fulfilling cycle. Once you develop a habit, these other lies that are given as truths, at least in our culture, start to kind of fall to the wayside because we see them for what they are. They're not truths. And he says it takes roughly 66 days to form a habit. I know for me it was 21 days was what I was always taught. Studies have shown that that's not quite right. For some people it takes longer. For some people it does take shorter. He says 66 days seems to be the sweet spot, which is kind of nice because for me developing a habit in 21 days usually doesn't happen. And I would always be like, what is wrong with me? Why can't I develop a habit in 21 days like everybody else apparently can? I should have gotten a drink of water. I'm really thirsty. So the summary for the disciplined life chapter is, number one, use selective discipline to develop habits, right? So you figure out what your one thing is. Don't multitask when you're working on it. Make a habit of working on it and push yourself. Use that discipline to make a habit of working on it, because eventually the discipline will be able to fall by the wayside because habit will kick in and you will be constantly doing that one right thing until it's done instead of feeling like you have to multitask and do all of the things. Number two, build one habit at a time. This is another one I'm guilty of. I will decide I want to change 4 things in my life at once. 4 big things. And that's not effective, and I know that's not effective. So he reinforces that here. Work on building one big habit at a time. And give each of those habits enough time, not the 21 days. If you pass the 21-day mark, don't kick yourself, because that means that you're normal. Chapter 7 is willpower is always on will call, is a lie that we've been told. He says willpower, it's not a bottomless well. We don't have a bottomless well of will from which to draw, right? I mean, as humans, do we really have a bottomless well of anything from which to draw? I would like to say kindness. I would like to hope that we could choose to have a bottomless well of kindness, but kindness is not willpower. So willpower is not a bottomless well from which we can just draw. It's powerful. Willpower can be very powerful, but it doesn't have any endurance. It actually takes using up your willpower, tapping into your willpower actually takes a physical toll on your body. Tapping into willpower, actually studies have shown, makes your blood sugar drop. So this chapter was really good about something that I've told you guys for a long time. I thought it tied in really well, is feed your brain, right? Feed your brain. Find the things that interest you, that give you a spark, that give you joy, and do those things, read those things, listen to those things. You know, that's where I figure, you know, we all are, you know, we may consume a lot, but those are good things to consume, right? Consume things that feed your brain. That will help strengthen your willpower. What happens when your willpower runs out? You fall back to your default settings, okay? So if your default settings, if you haven't established good habits, so your default settings are bad habits, so your willpower eventually runs out, because treat it like a tangible thing, like we talked about our time and energy being tangible things. When our willpower runs out, we kind of have to do what our default is, because we've drained ourselves. And if we haven't used the discipline that we talked about in chapter 6 to develop some good habits, our default settings are probably bad habits, which means we don't get the things done we want to get done, which means we then beat ourselves up for the things we didn't get done, which leads to procrastination as well. So you see how that's also a self-fulfilling cycle if we're not careful about our habits, because we need good habits in place for when we do run out of willpower, because willpower is not bottomless. We've talked before, a lot of you guys have talked before as well, about working with your brain, doing certain things at certain times of day, because during that time of day your brain is better doing one thing over the other, okay? So people who say create art, people who write, people who, if you have like phone calls to make, if you know, whatever the task is, if you know during a certain time of day that if I know in the morning right after I have some coffee is the best time for me to write, that's when I should sit down and write. I should work with my brain as much as possible, because later in the day, you know, 2, 3 o'clock, if I start to get tired, probably not the best time of day for me to sit down and try to write. Not much is going to come out. So it's like working with your brain. Doing what matters most when your willpower is at its highest helps you get the most potential out of your willpower, because your willpower is basically like a muscle, right? But not a muscle like your heart, where it just does its own thing and you don't have to think about it, and it just, right? It's a voluntary muscle. It's a muscle that you have to exert energy to use, and eventually it gets tired. What you feed your body with and what you feed your brain with will help feed your willpower, okay? Plus, like we talked about, it does take a physical toll. So the summary for willpower is, number 1, don't spread it too thin, which we just talked about. Again, this idea of focusing in as much as possible so you're not all spread out across the board. Number 2, feed your brain. And number 3, timing is everything. So make sure that you are feeding your brain, so that when it is the right time of day for you to access that willpower to really drill down and get something done, you are physically and mentally prepared for it. Chapter 8 is a balanced life. How many of us have grown up listening to this one? Because I know I did. The idea of having, you know, oh, we need work-life balance. That concept really never came about until the mid-'80s, apparently. He talks about that in the book. And he talks about how having balance is actually a lie, because spending time on one thing takes time away from other things, so balance truly cannot exist. And he says our concept of balance tends to mean enough time for everything and everything done in time. And I thought, oh my gosh, he's right. That is exactly how I see balance. I can get up in the morning, I can get everything done on time, and I have enough time to get all of those things done on time, and I can go to bed at night satisfied because I got everything done in time and on time, and I had enough time for everything and everybody, right? How ridiculous does that sound? It's not possible. It's just not. And I can't say it's because I have a big family, because it's not true. It was also not possible when I had no kids, and when I only had 2 kids, and when I only had 4 kids. So really should have gotten a bottle of water. So everything, enough time for everything and everything done in time. So he says, a lot like our multitudes of tasks on our task list, living in the middle keeps us from deeply committing to anything, right? And that's the idea of balancing, is I want to be in the middle. I don't want to be spending so much time on this stuff that none of this is getting touched, and vice versa. I want to stay as close to the middle as possible. Trying to do everything leads to every last thing getting shortchanged. Again, because I'm spread too thin, mentally, willpower-wise, everything. So he says, instead of thinking about balance, we should think about counterbalance, right? So never go so far away from the middle that you can't find your way back, or stay out there so long that the middle isn't there when you return. okay? So yes, it's okay to think extreme about some things, but you got to make sure you do it in a limited way to a point. And he also talks about the idea of treating work versus life differently when counterbalancing is concerned. And he says it perfectly. Sorry, one of the boys walked through. He said that in James Patterson's book, Suzanne's Diary for Nicholas, and I'm going to summarize this, it says, life is a game of juggling 5 balls: work, family, health, friends, integrity. Over time, you realize work is a rubber ball. If you drop work, it's going to bounce back, right? Now, yes, if you drop work enough, it's not going to bounce back. But when you're working and trying to, succeed in your work life, whatever your work life looks like, that if you drop that ball occasionally, it's going to bounce back. The other balls, family, health, friends, and integrity, those are made of glass. So if you drop them, they might shatter, right? So the idea of counterbalancing really carefully with friends and family and integrity is a really good one. And he talks about you have to be really aware. So he talks about with work, if you have to go extreme with your one thing, extreme to get that thing done, you have to choose to do that and be okay with the task that didn't get done. Delegate what you can, whatever your methods of dealing with the things that you're not going to get done are, because you are drilling down on this one super important thing, that you're going to have to teach yourself to be okay with those things that aren't getting done. With family and health and friends and integrity, that's a little bit harder. So he talks about going long at work. You have the middle, go ahead and go far away from the middle at work if it means success, right? With family and your health and friends and integrity, maybe go short, because the trick is, like, when you go to the extremes, that's when the big stuff happens. But if you're not careful when you're going to the extremes with things like family and friends and integrity and health, there may not be a middle for you to come back to if you weren't aware. So awareness is a really big key to this chapter. In his summary, he says, number 1, work and life are separate buckets or categories. Number 2, counterbalance your work bucket. Take what matters most to the extreme. So go long with work. Number 3, counterbalance your life bucket. Constant awareness is required, and go short so that you're always touching base back with the middle again. No matter how far, which direction you go from the middle, you always touch base again. You see the difference between the two? And the last chapter in this section, chapter 9, big is bad. That is a big lie we've all been told, is big is bad. None of us know our upward boundary for success, right? Your only upward boundary should be what you can imagine. And even then, it should probably be higher than that. We'll always sell ourselves short because of fear or apprehension or self-doubt or whatever, because we're human. Humans tend to sell ourselves short, okay? He says, quote, when you allow yourself that big is about who you can become, you look at it differently. So it's almost like going, hey, future self, right? What do you look like? What would I want future self to look like? What would I want future self to have to, to have achieved, okay? What would you do today? And what you do today, I loved this, what you do today will either empower or restrict you tomorrow, right? So there's a couple of years ago was the first time I had been introduced to the idea of, hey, future self, right? Oh, sorry, future self. Sorry about that procrastinating that made your video late, future self. No, procrastinating did not actually make this video late. I would own it if it did though, but it didn't, not this time. Those guys. Thinking big isn't the absence of doubts, but moving past them. And see, I think where the balance chapter and the big is bad chapter, what those really if you can get the other things started to be tacked down, if you can kind of start to pin down the concept of not multitasking and, really drilling down and focusing on one thing at a time, and, pardon me, not always relying on willpower, or at least using it at the right times. If you can do those things, then doing things like thinking big will be easier, because you won't have the constant mental clutter of, oh, but I can't go extreme with that because I have to do these 80 other things too. You won't look at those other things the same way once you start to develop the habit of really drilling down on the one thing. So his summary is, number 1, think big. Try to avoid incremental thinking. That's one I struggle with. I'm always one of those, I just need to do the next right thing. That's all I need to do. And I know if I'm kind of in survival mode, that's all I can do, is go just what is the next right thing that I need to do. I'm not going to worry about the big picture right now. I'm not in the mindset for it. When I am in the mindset for it, I want to avoid that kind of thinking. I want to double down everywhere that I possibly can. Number 2 is think different. And this we talked about a little bit with the bullet journal method last summer, is being able to connect completely disparate ideas. That's creativity, that's genius, is being able to connect things that maybe it's connections within 2 areas of interest in your life that other people wouldn't see. So, you know, trying to think outside the box basically, or think differently than you normally would. Number 3 is act bold. Think of the big things and then imagine them. So the hey future self thing, right? Go ahead and take the time when you think big to think it into, you know, what would that look like in reality. And number 4, don't fear failure. Extraordinary results are built on failures as well as positive results, which is a really tough one again for us to think, oh, I'm going to fail. So you have all this self-doubt and fear, and you're going to fail. Success is built on just as much failure as it is on positive results. So it's okay to fail, because you have to look at it and go, okay, why did that fail? Why did that not work? What can I do differently to make it work better? And then you learn from that, right? That's what I tell my kids when they're learning math all the time, is that's how you learn math, is by screwing it up. It's the only way you learn, is by screwing it up. So that is it. That is section 2 of The One Thing by Gary Keller. Oh my goodness, that was a big section. So this is late. I'm hoping by this coming Sunday, I will have week 3 video up. Still in Nostalgy, nothing has changed there. And you guys, please join us in the band app. I've been a little quiet there this last week. Like I said, this last week kind of blew up here, but there's some really good discussion going on in there. So please join us there. I will put the links for everything down below. I hope you're enjoying One Book July. Make sure if you join us, you hashtag anything One Book July 2020. Make sure to check out Rhomany's and Vicky's and Meg's videos, and I will talk to you guys soon. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.